Hi and good morning, it's Jim from maverickstar Observatory. Guys, before we begin, I've got a real good video hopefully, a lot of common sense in this and logic, I think you'll agree. But before we get into it, just want to say a big thanks to a few people that are supporting us here at the Observatory. It's difficult times for us all, as most of us know, and it isn't mandatory to support the Observatory, but you know, we're going to slowly grind to a halt. It's going to be like a yacht in the sea or the ocean without wind in its sail. So you know, if you can afford and would like to make a donation, the links are down there in the description, or you can become one of our patrons. It's up to you. Okay, so we're looking at CO2 and glacial cycles, and most of you may or may not know that around 12,000 years ago we was in a glacial cycle. And you know, the reason why I wanted to show you this chart is to just get you thinking about a few things that's going on in the scientific community today with regards to CO2 and you know, glacial periods and interglacial periods. But you know, just bring out some of the information in this chart for you so that you can make your own unbiased decision as to what it is you're hearing in mainstream news and you see before you in this chart. Now, most of the data from charts like this come from core samples, sedimentary core samples. Over the years, gives us a record of the levels of CO2 and global temperature, and also, you know, within them, I mean, you can get quite a lot of information out of core samples. You can get ideas of, you know, the levels of pollen, so what trees and vegetation was thriving at the time, and so on and so forth. But I want to concentrate on just two things in this video, and that is the levels of CO2 and glacial periods. Now you can see we was in a glacial period 12,000 years ago. It's a very thin slice at the end by the zero on the bottom of the chart where it goes blue, and then that very thin slice where it comes out of the glacial period into an interglacial period, which we are in right now, and you can see the CO2 levels rise. Firstly, we can see that when we come out of glacial periods, obviously the climate warms up a little bit, and therefore more CO2 seems to get released. And that shouldn't come as a surprise to you. If ever you've opened a cold bottle of drink with CO2 gas in it, you'll notice that it doesn't release as much gas as if it was hot. If that bottle was at 30 degrees temperature and you released it, you'd probably have the CO2, you know, cause like almost a volcano of that pop or whatever beverage it was that was in the bottle. So we know that CO2 is more absorbed at lower temperatures in liquids, and very likely we're talking about the oceans around the world. So when temperatures start to increase a little bit, it shouldn't come as a surprise that the CO2 gets released from the oceans and therefore starts to climb up as the temperatures on the surface and atmospheric temperatures warm up slightly. But the point is this, you know, they're talking like alarmists, and you know, I use that word because Tony Eller, if you've ever watched him on YouTube, he's always talking about this. They are alarmists because they're forgetting everything that has happened in our history. I mean, we're only going back 650,000 years here of you know, CO2 and glaciation. But the point is this, is that they completely omit all the other times where CO2 has risen above levels that they are at right now. If you follow me, nearly every week or so now, we do Earth Health at a glance, and we take the CO2 meter and take an atmospheric CO2 reading. I think the last time, just off the top of my head, it was around 422 parts per million. If you look at the chart here and all those yellow peaks, you'll see that we've surpassed 250 parts per million many times. And then after, you know, the peak of the CO2, you see it start to decline, and lo and behold, we go back into a glacial period. The point is this, is that mainstream media And mainstream scientists all around the world are completely admitting the fact that, this is a natural occurrence, and yet today we're told that this is responsible from this is something that we did starting from the 1760s, the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Yet they admit the fact that I think the Dalton minimum occurred after that. So we've had temperatures decrease after the Industrial Revolution began, and that doesn't really marry up with what they're saying, because you would expect, if we started polluting the atmosphere and increasing the temperature as a result of our Industrial Revolution point in time, you would expect temperatures to increase from that period on to this present moment, alongside with CO2, but we don't see that. And they certainly don't show you CO2 still rising but global temperatures declining. And I couldn't show you the amount of snow that is building up over the Arctic, and I could show you that quite easily, and show you that we are not at this point in time showing massive signs of losses of ice over the Arctic Circle right now. So that's one point I wanted to make. The other point I wanted to make is that we are on the precipice of going back into another glacial period, and the reason why that's important is because I just want to use an example of what happened over the last couple of weeks in Texas, where 100 million people were affected by a 30-year low cold Arctic snap. It affected 100 million people in that state, and I suppose neighbouring states. That's a lot of people, and a lot of people out of those 100 million were in a situation where it was almost a crisis and an emergency situation for them. And that was just something that happened in a couple of weeks. If you look at the time periods of how long ice ages last, glacial periods last, you'll see that they last sometimes thousands of years. And I just want to ask the question, how would we cope if only after just 2 weeks of Arctic air blast in a region that had a 30-year low snap caught out 100 million people, how do you think it would affect the global population? The thing is that glacial periods, the last time, affected most of the northern hemisphere, and it is probably one of the most densely populated areas on the planet. And we've got 7 billion people on the planet now, probably going on to 8 billion people, which is a lot of people, and a lot of people that need feeding. And during a glacial period, most of the northern hemisphere gets taken offline with regards to the ability to grow food in that region of our planet. Yet this is something that the scientists have known about for many years. We have all the records to show this is something that regularly occurs, and yet there has been very little preparation to even prevent a 2-week cold snap taking place. If we go back into a glacial period, and no one quite knows how fast we move into a glacial period, but I would presume that there would be, like we're seeing now, interchange between tropical and polar jet streams over the northern hemisphere, which would in turn bring more Arctic air lower than it usually does. And we could have over the region of the northern hemisphere large snowfall, and that would cover the whole of the northern hemisphere in a blanket of white snow, which would be a perfect reflector of solar radiation, and we could very easily slip back into another glacial period from that point in time. It could be something that took place over a year or two, and we would be back in that situation. And the problem is that the likelihood of this happening again is very real, and I would say even more so because we're in a magnetic pole reversal, and we already have the malfunctioning of jet streams at present, which are, delivering these cold snaps that we saw in Texas. So, I wanted to just bring a couple of facts to you. We are on the doorstep, clearly, from the chart we're looking at going back into another glacial period. CO2 levels have risen above 250 parts per million, naturally, and without, humans being the cause of it. This is a natural occurrence. And, the third thing is that, we are ill prepared for this event, which we already know. And, this is not something that's not known to these scientists in these organisations. We are ill prepared to cope with the next glacial period, despite our evolution in technology. We are not ready for it. And what happened in Texas just is proof of that. What do they want to do? They know that the next glacial period is at the doorstep, and they are pushing more of these green energy devices such as wind generators and solar panels. And we already saw the failures of these devices in this crisis that took place in Texas, where the snow was all over the photovoltaic panels, and the wings on the wind generators would froze solid. And even when you have a particular type of wind generator that has heated wings, they were still not in use. Excuse me. And still consuming energy, which meant that this machine that was built to produce electricity is no longer producing electricity, but it is actually consuming electricity. So this is where we are. We're here with people that completely deny the fact that CO2 levels have been over what they are today. We've been through many glacial periods. We're going through a rare situation right now where the Earth's poles are reversing. And the majority of people, and I say 95% of the people on this planet, believe that the planet is going through climate change as a result of human interaction. And glacial periods are not something that's talked ever on the news about, yet we are on the doorstep of going back into one. And we may already have seen the evidence of that with the last 20 years of peaking in temperature, and now seeing a slow decline. Lots of thoughts go through my mind. How we're going to keep feeding everybody in the world. How we're going to grow crops. With the difficulties of borders, how are we going to be able to migrate to countries that can offer, land that is growable? And, with passports and borders, how will we get there? If it affected 100 million people in just 2 weeks, what would 6 months, what would 1 year, 5 years, 10 years of sustained low Arctic temperatures do to our modern advanced civilization? What would it do to it? We don't have the replacements should we have a grid go down as a result of ice building up on the power cables. We don't have the replacements for that. You can't replace the entire grid overnight. And if you cannot get that grid back up and running in a short space of time, you inevitably shut down the logistics of the countries and cities. That means food doesn't go into the cities, waste doesn't come out of the cities, and you have densely populated areas where there is many people without food, heating, like we saw in Texas only a week ago, that are now plunged back into the dark ages without the necessary skills or provisions to help themselves during a situation like that. Just what are our politicians and our scientists actually, doing? What is actually their role and job? Well, I hope you got something out of the video, and I'll say what I usually do. There's a link down there if you want to help support what we do. I hope you feel that there is a value to the information that we put out there. We use facts, not speculation. We use equipment in the field, not guesstimates. Anyhow, links down there in the description. I'll say what I usually do. You have a good day. Look after your loved ones, as always. Bye for now.